The chanting started as a distant murmur, but Marie Antoinette knew that sound. She knew how Parisian mobs moved through streets like water finding cracks. From her prison window, she could hear them getting closer, their voices rising with each step. Then she heard it, her own name mixed with another. Lamballe, Marie Antoinette, come see your friend. Her hands found the cold iron bars as shadows danced on her cell wall. One shadow stood taller than the rest, swaying on what looked like a pole. No, not a pole, a pike. And the shape at the top. Marie Antoinette's breathing quickened. She knew that silhouette. She'd styled that hair herself countless times. The mob's chant became clearer now. Kiss her. Kiss your friend. Look at what we've brought you. Her whispered, no, 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 disappeared into the September air as the procession stopped directly beneath her window. They wanted her to look. They needed her to see. This wasn't just violence. This was cruelty designed with surgical precision. They'd turned her dearest friend into an instrument of torture. But to understand this moment of weaponized friendship, we need to go back. We need to understand how a woman known as the Angel for her charity work ended up as the star of this nightmare parade. How does devotion become a death sentence? How does a widow's loyalty transform into a severed head on a pike, thrust at her best friend's prison window? This is the story of Princesse De Lamballe's final hours and the terrifying arithmetic of revolutionary justice. The letter trembled in her hands. Come back to me, it read. We must live and die together. Princesse de Lamballe sat in her comfortable English drawing room, safe from the chaos consuming France, and read Marie Antoinette's plea again. Outside, her borrowed estate in Surrey stretched peacefully under grey skies. Inside, her heart tore itself in two. She'd escaped. That's the part that makes everything else so much worse. In 1791, she'd made it out. While French nobles died in droves, she sipped tea with English aristocrats who clucked sympathetically about those dreadful events in Paris. She had money, connections, safety. She had everything except peace of mind. But here's where it gets insane. She actually wrote her will before going back. Think about that. She sat at an English desk, in perfect safety, and methodically listed who would inherit her jewels, her estates, her beloved dogs. She wrote letters to friends, explaining her choice. One line stands out, duty and friendship call me to share the Queen's dangers. Now remember, this wasn't some naive girl making impulsive decisions. Lamballe was 42 years old, a widow who'd survived the French court's vicious politics for decades. She knew exactly what awaited her in France. The newspapers reaching England painted Paris in blood, priests murdered, nobles hunted, anyone connected to the royal family marked for death. Her English friends begged her to stay. They actually staged interventions, gathering in her drawing room to list every reason she should remain in Surrey. The revolution was devouring its own children. The king and queen were already prisoners. What could one woman do except add herself to the victim list? But Lamballe had made promises. 20 years of friendship bound her to Marie Antoinette with chains stronger than iron. She'd sworn to stand by the queen in good times and bad. The good times had evaporated. Only the promise remained. The journey back to France became a meditation on mortality. She crossed the Channel in early 1792, watching England disappear into mist. Other passengers avoided her, recognizing the famous Princesse de Lamballe and understanding her journey could only end one way. The boat captain later recalled how she stood at the rail for hours, absolutely still, like someone memorizing their last view of safety. At Calais, French guards searched her luggage with unusual thoroughness. They found letters, jewelry, money, but nothing treasonous, just the possessions of a woman returning home. They couldn't arrest her for loyalty. Not yet. The road to Paris stretched before her like a path to an altar or a scaffold. Each mile brought new evidence of France's transformation. Abandoned estates with broken windows, trees festooned with revolutionary cockades, graffiti promising death to aristocrats, and everywhere, the eyes of common people who'd learned to see nobles as enemies. She could have turned back at any point. That's what haunts this story. At every coaching inn, every checkpoint, every moment of that journey, she could have reversed course. She had the money. She had the connections. She had every opportunity to choose life. Instead, she sent word ahead to Marie Antoinette. I am coming. The Queen's response arrived by messenger just before Lamballe entered Paris. joy mixed with terror, gratitude shadowed by guilt. Marie Antoinette begged her to reconsider, even while expressing desperate need for her presence. The royal family was isolated, surrounded by hostile guards and fair-weather friends who'd already begun distancing themselves. Lamballe's carriage rolled through Paris gates on a grey morning. The city she'd known had vanished. Revolutionary fervour had repainted everything in red, white, and blue. Monarchist symbols had been chiselled off buildings. Street names honouring kings and saints had been replaced with revolutionary heroes. Even the air smelled different, less perfume, more gunpowder. But she pressed on to the Tuileries Palace, where the royal family lived under house arrest. The reunion with Marie Antoinette was brief, tearful, and observed by guards who reported every word. These two women who'd once spent hours planning court entertainments now whispered about escape routes and loyal servants. They'd once debated fashion and philosophy. Now they discussed which guards might be bribed and which would slit their throats for a revolutionary medal. She stepped off the boat in Calais, knowing she'd likely never leave France alive, but friendship demanded her presence, and Princesse De Lamballe had never broken a promise to her queen. At just 18, she stood at her husband's deathbed, the stench of his disease filling the room. Prince de Lamballe's body had become a battlefield where syphilis won every skirmish. The young bride who'd arrived at the French court full of hope now watched her husband rot from the inside out. Palace doctors whispered their useless remedies while everyone pretended not to know the truth. The prince had caught his death in Parisian brothels. The marriage had lasted exactly 1 year. 1 year of discovering her husband preferred literally anyone else to his sweet young wife. 1 year of sitting alone while he squandered their fortune on courtesans. 1 year of court ladies offering pitying smiles while whispering behind their fans. Then mercy arrived, dressed as death. But here's the thing about tragedy. Sometimes it opens unexpected doors. The young widow's genuine grief touched something in Marie Antoinette. The queen, barely older than Lamballe herself, recognized a kindred spirit. Both were foreigners in the French court. Both understood the loneliness of loveless marriages. Both needed a friend. Their first real conversation happened in the palace gardens, away from gossiping courtiers. Marie Antoinette found Lamballe feeding birds, tears still fresh on her cheeks. Instead of offering empty platitudes, the queen sat beside her in silence. Sometimes understanding doesn't need words. That quiet moment sparked a friendship that would define both women's lives. Within months, Lamballe became the queen's closest confidant. Within a year, Marie Antoinette appointed her superintendent of the household, the highest position a woman could hold at court. Now remember, this wasn't just some ceremonial title. The superintendent controlled access to the queen, managed her massive household budget, and wielded real political influence. Lamballe suddenly found herself at the center of French power, managing hundreds of servants and navigating court intrigue that would make modern politics look like child's play. The appointment ceremony took place in the Hall of Mirrors, with every important noble in attendance. Lamballe wore white silk embroidered with silver thread, the queen's choice, symbolizing their pure friendship. Marie Antoinette personally placed the golden key of office around her friend's neck. The court applauded politely while calculating how to use this new power dynamic. What the courtiers didn't understand was that Lamballe never wanted power, she wanted purpose. The widow's grief had left her adrift until Marie Antoinette offered her a reason to continue. Managing the queen's household gave her days, structure, and meaning. More importantly, it gave her someone to protect. And protect she did. Lamballe became famous for shielding Marie Antoinette from the worst court cruelties. When pamphlets mocked the queen's Austrian accent, Lamballe organized French lessons. When gossips spread lies about royal extravagance, Lamballe opened the household books to prove the queen's charity. When courtiers snubbed Marie Antoinette, Lamballe used her own impeccable reputation to force social acceptance. The friendship deepened through shared interests. Both women loved music. They spent hours at the harpsichord, composing little songs that made each other laugh. Both adored gardens. They designed romantic groves at Versailles, where they could escape court formality. Both possessed sharp intellects, trapped in roles that demanded beautiful emptiness. But their greatest bond was understanding. Lamballe never judged Marie Antoinette's struggles to produce an heir. The queen never mentioned Lamballe's humiliating marriage. They created a space where they could be human beings instead of symbols. The court called Lamballe the angel, partly for her kindness, partly for her ethereal beauty. Pale blonde hair, enormous blue eyes, a voice contemporaries described as music itself. But the nickname also carried an edge. Angels don't belong in this world. They're too pure to survive human corruption. Years passed in this bubble of friendship. The women grew older together, weathering scandals and disappointments. Lamballe stood by Marie Antoinette through the diamond necklace affair, through vicious pamphlets calling the Queen every name imaginable, through the growing hatred of a populace that blamed royal excess for their empty stomachs. By 1789, when revolution exploded, their roles had reversed. Now Marie Antoinette needed protection, and Lamballe provided it. As crowds demanded royal blood, the angel stood between her friend and the mob's rage. She could have distanced herself. Other courtiers fled like rats from a burning building. But Lamballe had made her choice 2 decades earlier, in a palace garden. The appointment ceremony felt like triumph. Neither woman realized they'd just signed a death warrant. In revolutionary mathematics, proximity to the Queen equaled treason. Every act of friendship would be rewritten as conspiracy. Every kindness would become evidence. The Duke of Brunswick's letter hit Paris like a bomb. Touch the royal family, and we'll burn your city to ashes. The Austrian commander's manifesto, issued in July 1792, was supposed to cow French revolutionaries into submission. Instead, it transformed fear into murderous rage. Every Parisian now believed foreign armies were marching to slaughter them in their beds. Think about that level of panic. You're a Parisian baker or seamstress, already hungry from grain shortages, already angry at centuries of noble privilege. Now you learn that Austrian and Prussian armies are coming to restore the monarchy. Worse, they promise to execute anyone who resisted. Your neighbors whisper about aristocratic spies signaling enemy troops. Every palace servant becomes a potential traitor. Every priest might be blessing foreign bullets. But here's where it gets dark. The paranoia had real fuel. Letters were intercepted proving the Queen had sent French military plans to Austria. Nobles were caught trying to flee with gold to fund enemy armies. The royal family had attempted escape just a year earlier, stopped only by pure luck at Varennes. How many other plots were brewing? How many traitors walked free? Jean-Paul Marat's newspaper, L'Ami du Peuple, turned fear into policy. This is crucial. Marat wasn't some fringe lunatic. He was a respected journalist whose words shaped revolutionary thought. And his words in August 1792 were precise. The prisons are full of conspirators. The enemy approaches. We cannot fight abroad while leaving vipers at our backs. The math was simple and terrifying. Paris held about 3,000 prisoners, common criminals mixed with political detainees. If foreign armies broke through, these prisoners would be released to join the slaughter. Better to eliminate the threat now. Better to act than react. The Assembly tried half-hearted measures. They ordered arrests of anyone suspected of royalist sympathies. Priests who refused the constitutional oath were rounded up. Known aristocrats found themselves in chains. But this only made things worse. Now the prisons really were full of potential counter-revolutionaries. By late August, Paris had become a pressure cooker. Volunteer armies prepared to march against the invaders while leaving their families unprotected. Workers sharpened weapons in the streets. Revolutionary committees met in wine shops to list enemies. Everyone waited for either salvation or slaughter. Then came August 10th. The royal palace was stormed. The Swiss guards were massacred. The king and queen became prisoners in the Temple Tower. But instead of calming fears, this victory increased them. If the monarchy could fall so easily, what other threats lurked unseen? The city's soundscape changed. Church bells that once called prayers now summoned emergency meetings. Drums beat constantly, calling citizens to arms. In working-class neighborhoods, women sang revolutionary songs while making bullets. Children played execution games with dolls. The very air vibrated with anticipation of violence. Food disappeared from markets as people hoarded for siege. Wine shops ran dry as men drank courage for battles to come. The summer heat made everything worse. Rotting garbage, unwashed bodies, the smell of fear itself. Paris in late August 1792 assaulted every sense with evidence of impending catastrophe. Revolutionary leaders faced an impossible choice. The prisons bulged with enemies. The armies needed every able-bodied man at the frontier. Who would guard the prisoners while Paris emptied of defenders? What if royalist sympathizers organized a mass breakout? What if the prisoners were freed by foreign troops? Marat provided the solution everyone feared to speak. Let the people's justice handle the people's enemies. He didn't explicitly call for massacre. He didn't need to. Everyone understood. The prisons must be emptied one way or another. By September 1st, the enemy was just days from Paris. Verdun, the last major fortress, teetered on the edge of surrender. Panic reached crescendo. Men rushed to enlist, leaving weapons with their wives. Civilians dug trenches in the suburbs. The city prepared for house-to-house fighting. In this atmosphere of absolute terror, the prison question moved from theoretical to urgent. The assembly washed its hands, focusing on military preparations. The Paris Commune, the revolutionary city government, made vague statements about necessary measures. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone pretended not to know. The night of September 1st passed, in eerie quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that precedes storms. In their cells, prisoners felt the change. Guards became nervous, avoiding eye contact. Meal deliveries grew erratic. The normal prison routine, never pleasant, dissolved into ominous chaos. As September dawned, 1,400 prisoners sat in their cells, unaware they had hours to live. The mathematics of murder had been calculated. Now came the arithmetic lesson written in blood. 10 seconds. That's how long each trial lasted. 10 seconds to decide life or death. The September massacres began with bureaucratic efficiency that makes the horror worse. At the Abbey prison, they actually set up tables, appointed judges, kept records. They wanted their murder to look like justice. It started September 2nd, Sunday afternoon. Church bells were ringing for Vespers when the first mob arrived at the Abbey. About 150 men, mostly from the working-class sections, armed with pikes, sabres and iron bars. But here's what's terrifying. They didn't rush in screaming. They formed orderly lines. They elected a tribunal president. They created a process. The president, a wine merchant named Maillard, established the rules. Each prisoner would be brought forward. Their name would be read from prison registers. The crowd would vote, death or freedom. Then the sentence would be executed immediately. No appeals, no delays. Justice served hot. The first victim was a priest who'd refused the constitutional oath. They asked him one question: "Will you swear loyalty to the nation?" He responded, "I cannot betray my conscience." The crowd voted. 10 seconds had passed. They pushed him outside where the execution committee waited with raised weapons. Now remember, these weren't professional executioners. These were bakers, carpenters, shop clerks who'd appointed themselves instruments of popular justice. The priest stumbled into their midst. The killing was clumsy, horrible, prolonged. It took dozens of blows. The executioners learned they needed better organization. By the third victim, they'd established an efficient system. The condemned would be pushed through the prison gate. The first row of killers would strike at the head and shoulders. If the victim fell forward, perfect. If they stumbled back, the second row would finish the job. Bodies would be immediately dragged aside to clear space for the next. The grotesque theatre spread to other prisons with shocking speed. At La Force, they refined the process further. 2 lines of killers formed a gauntlet. The condemned had to walk between them, while blows rained down. Some made it 3 steps, some made it 10. None made it through. Inside the prisons, the sounds told everything. Prisoners pressed against their cell doors, listening to names being called, verdicts pronounced, then the terrible sounds from outside, the thud of impact, the briefest screams, the crowd's roar of approval. They counted the intervals between victims: 5 minutes, 3 minutes, sometimes less. But here's where the human mind reveals its darkness. The killers developed pride in their work. They competed for efficiency. They mocked clumsy newcomers who needed multiple blows. They created a hierarchy of murder, where the best executioners earned respect and free drinks at nearby taverns. The tribunal's questions became ritual mockery. Do you love the nation? Of course, prisoners said yes. Then why were you conspiring against it? No answer could save them. The questions were just theatre, giving revolutionary legitimacy to predetermined death. At the conciergerie prison, they didn't even bother with questions. The register itself became the verdict. Noble title? Death? Priest? Death? Anyone arrested for royalist sympathies? Death. The trials accelerated, until they were processing a victim every minute. The prison chapels became waiting rooms for slaughter. Groups of 20 or 30 prisoners would be herded together, listening to names being called like some nightmare roll call. Some prayed, some wept. Some sat in stunned silence. A few tried to prepare final messages, writing on walls with charcoal or their own blood. Guards faced their own crisis. Some fled rather than participate. Others threw themselves into the killing with enthusiasm. Most simply stepped aside, neither helping nor hindering. They'd been guarding these prisoners for weeks or months, knew their names, their stories. Now they watched them march to death in orderly lines. The efficiency was interrupted by moments of particular cruelty, when they recognized a specially hated figure, a harsh judge, a notorious aristocrat. The killing slowed. The crowd demanded special treatment. These victims didn't get the mercy of quick death. They became entertainment. By nightfall September 2nd, the system was perfected. Teams rotated to prevent exhaustion. Tavern keepers brought wine to keep spirits high. Women arrived with food for the workers of death. Children climbed walls and trees for better views. The massacre had become a festival. Prison after prison received its visit from People's Justice. The Bernardines Monastery, the Carmes Convent, La Salpêtrière Women's Prison. Each developed its own variation on the theme, but the mathematics remained constant. Mock trial plus immediate execution equals revolutionary justice. In La Force prison, Princesse De Lamballe heard the screams getting closer. She'd listened all day as the efficient machine of murder processed her fellow prisoners. Now, footsteps approached her cell. A key turned in the lock. They offered her life for 7 words. I hate the king and queen. That's all Princesse de Lamballe had to say. 7 words between her and freedom. The September sun slanted through the prison window as she stood before the makeshift tribunal, understanding with perfect clarity that her next sentence would determine her fate. The trial room at La Force prison had been a chapel once. Now revolutionary justice occupied the altar. Behind a simple wooden table sat 3 judges, a locksmith, a butcher, and a clerk who kept careful notes. The walls still showed faint outlines where religious paintings had been ripped down. In their place hung a single revolutionary banner: liberty, equality, fraternity, or death. But here's what makes this moment so haunting. They actually wanted to spare her. Unlike the priests and nobles who'd been processed like cattle, Lamballe sparked something resembling mercy. Maybe it was her reputation for charity, maybe her famous beauty, maybe simple exhaustion after hours of killing. The lead judge, Hébert, opened with an almost gentle tone. Marie, Thérèse Louise de Savoie, Carignan, you stand accused of conspiracy against the nation. The evidence was pathetic. Letters to the Queen discussing household matters, receipts for charitable donations, a travel pass from her return to France. Nothing remotely treasonous. Even by the tribunal's mock standards, they had no case. Hébert shuffled papers, buying time, then asked the ritual questions. Were you a friend of the former queen? I had that honor. Do you know of plots against the nation? I know of none. Did you correspond with enemies of France? Never. Each answer was clear, calm, truthful. Lamballe didn't plead or weep like some prisoners. She stood straight, meeting their eyes, her voice never wavering. Witnesses later described her as pale but perfectly composed, as if she'd rehearsed this moment in her cell. Then came the crucial exchange. Hébert leaned forward, speaking slowly, making sure she understood. The nation requires a simple oath. Swear hatred for the king, the queen, and monarchy. Swear loyalty to the republic. Do this, and you may go free. The room fell silent. Everyone understood this was theatre, but suddenly the performance felt real. The other judges shifted uncomfortably. Even the guards seemed to hold their breath. Here was a woman who could save herself with words that meant nothing. Thousands had already taken similar oaths. Words were just words. Lamballe's response came without hesitation. I will swear the first oath. I cannot swear the second. It is not in my heart. Hébert tried again, his voice urgent now. Citizen, consider carefully. The queen is imprisoned, powerless. The king will likely die. Your loyalty serves no purpose. Save yourself. Swear the oath. I have already sworn loyalty to the queen. I cannot swear its opposite. That would make me something I am not, a liar and a coward. The butcher judge exploded. Then you choose death for pride. I choose truth over life built on lies. This is the moment that echoes through history. In a room stinking of blood, surrounded by men who'd spent hours orchestrating murder, one woman insisted on integrity. She could have rationalized the oath, sworn it while maintaining mental reservations, sworn it to survive and help others, sworn it as meaningless words to bloodthirsty men. Instead, she chose authenticity. Hébert made one last attempt, practically begging, "Madame, I implore you, say the words. Just say them. No one expects genuine hatred. Save yourself. If the words mean nothing, why do you need them? If they mean something, how can I speak them falsely?" The logic was unassailable. The judges exchanged glances. The clerk's pen hovered over his ledger. Everyone in that room knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. A person choosing principle over life so clearly, so calmly, it made their revolutionary fervor look like childish tantrum. Hébert's voice turned formal, cold. Then the tribunal pronounces its verdict. Let Madame be set at liberty. The phrase was code everyone recognized. Set at liberty meant released to the executioners outside, but Lamballe smiled slightly, as if appreciating the irony. She curtsied to her judges, an aristocratic gesture that must have stung their revolutionary pride, and turned toward the door. "Wait," Hébert called out. "One last chance. The oath. 7 words." She paused at the threshold between life and death, considering. The September sun through the window caught her hair, turning it gold. For a heartbeat, she might have been back at Versailles, pausing before entering a ballroom. Then she spoke her actual last words to the tribunal. "I have never lied. I will not begin now." She heard liberty and felt hope. Then she saw their smirks. The door opened onto a courtyard where liberty wore a very different face. The first blow came from behind, a hammer to the base of her skull. The executioners had learned efficiency meant attacking from blind spots, denying victims even the dignity of seeing death approach. Lamballe stumbled forward into the courtyard, her hand instinctively reaching for the wound as blood began seeping through her carefully pinned hair. The September heat made the courtyard shimmer like a vision of hell. About 30 men waited in a rough semicircle, their improvised weapons already slick from the day's work. But here's what survivors noticed. When Lamballe appeared, several executioners stepped back. Her beauty, even bloodied, even terrified, made some hesitate. That hesitation lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then the mob mentality reasserted itself. A pike thrust caught her shoulder, spinning her around. A saber slash opened her arm. She raised her hands in futile defense as blows rained from every direction. The courtyard's architecture created an echo chamber, where each impact sounded twice. But something unexpected happened. Instead of screaming or begging, Lamballe remained almost silent. Witnesses reported only small gasps, the involuntary sounds of a body enduring damage. This unnerved the killers. They were used to victims who pleaded, cursed, prayed loudly. Her quiet suffering felt like judgment. The attack intensified, becoming less execution than frenzy. The initial organization, the careful gauntlet system, dissolved into chaos. Men pushed forward to strike their blow, to participate in destroying this symbol of aristocratic privilege. Some swung wildly, hitting their comrades. Others hung back, suddenly nauseated by what they'd been doing all day. A locksmith named Grisson later testified about these 3 minutes. He'd been drinking wine to maintain his courage, but Lamballe's dignity cut through his intoxication. He watched her try to stay standing, even as her legs gave way. He saw her lips moving in what might have been prayer, or might have been her friend's name. He saw humanity being methodically destroyed, and felt his revolutionary fervor drain away. The mechanics of mob murder are both chaotic and predictable. Once Lamballe fell, the crowd's dynamic shifted. Those who'd hesitated now rushed forward, not wanting to appear less revolutionary than their neighbors. The weapons became less precise, clubs and bars replacing sabers. The violence became less about killing, more about obliteration. This is the dark mathematics of group violence. Each participant needs only contribute a fraction of the total horror. One man might land a single blow, then retreat, telling himself he barely participated. Another might strike twice, then claim the victim was already dying. The responsibility disperses until no one feels like a murderer, just someone caught in historical forces. But individual choices still mattered. A young apprentice named Louis dropped his weapon and vomited. A National Guardsman tried to pull men back, shouting, "Enough! She's dead!" He was shoved aside, called a royalist sympathizer. The killing continued past any practical purpose. Time dilated strangely during violence. Witnesses gave wildly different estimates. Some said the attack lasted 30 seconds. Others swore it was 10 minutes. The truth was probably 3 minutes of concentrated savagery, though Lamballe likely lost consciousness in the first 60 seconds. The human skull can only withstand so much before mercy arrives as oblivion. When the frenzy finally exhausted itself, the courtyard fell eerily quiet. The executioners stood panting, splattered with evidence of their work. Some immediately headed for wine shops to wash the taste from their mouths. Others stared at what they'd done, perhaps beginning to realize they'd crossed a line from which there was no return. The body that had housed Princesse De Lamballe lay unrecognizable. The woman who'd been called the angel for her ethereal beauty had been reduced to meat and cloth. But even this wasn't enough. As the killers caught their breath, someone suggested they weren't finished. The Queen needed to know her friend's fate. A carpenter named Charlat made the proposal that would echo through history. He pointed at the corpse and spoke words that transformed murder into something worse. "We're not done here. She was the Queen's friend. The Queen must see what happens to her friends." The exhausted killers found new energy. If simply killing aristocrats was revolutionary justice, what greater justice could there be than using death itself as a weapon? They had killed the body. Now they would kill the memory. They would turn friendship into horror. But killing her wasn't enough. They had darker plans for her remains. The September sun climbed higher as they prepared to transform a corpse into a message, a human being into a political statement written in flesh. Someone had an idea so cruel it would echo through history. As the executioners stood over Lamballe's destroyed body, a wigmaker named Grisson stepped forward with professional interest. "The Queen always admired her hair," he said. "Perhaps she'd like to see it one more time." The suggestion rippled through the crowd like electricity. Here was innovation in cruelty, a way to extend their power beyond mere killing. They couldn't reach Marie Antoinette in her Tower prison, but they could send her a message she'd never forget. They could weaponize the very friendship that had brought Lamballe back to France. What happened next requires strong stomachs to contemplate. The killers became craftsmen. Using knives and saws, they separated Lamballe's head with disturbing care. This wasn't frenzied hacking but deliberate preparation. The head would be their message, so it needed to be recognizable. Grisson took charge of the preparation. In a grotesque parody of his normal trade, he washed the blood from Lamballe's famous blonde hair. He styled it carefully, even adding powder to restore its fashionable appearance. Other men cleaned the face, closing the eyes, arranging features into a semblance of peace. They wanted Marie Antoinette to recognize her friend, to see past the violence to the person she'd loved. But here's where mob creativity turned truly dark. Someone suggested they needed more than just the head. They stripped Lamballe's body, exposing the corpse to September sun and searching eyes. They mutilated what remained in ways that decency forbids describing. They transformed a woman into an anatomy lesson in hatred. A pike was procured from a nearby guard post. The head was mounted with ceremony, raised high for all to see. The crowd that had been thinning suddenly swelled as word spread. Here was entertainment beyond simple execution. Here was revolutionary justice with theatrical flair. The procession formed spontaneously. At the front, the pike-bearer held his trophy high. Behind him, men carried other pieces of Lamballe on improvised spears. The crowd began to sing revolutionary songs, but the words were changed, made obscene, mocking the friendship between princess and queen. They invented verses about aristocratic vice, about unnatural affections, about justice finally served. The march to Marie Antoinette's prison became a parade of escalating frenzy. At every corner, new participants joined. Women who'd been making bandages for the army dropped their work to follow. Children ran alongside, throwing stones at the grotesque trophies. Shopkeepers came to their doors, some cheering, others turning away in disgust. They knew exactly which prison held the Queen, the Temple Tower, a medieval fortress now serving revolutionary justice. More importantly, they knew which window was hers. Spies among the guards had provided detailed intelligence. Marie Antoinette's cell faced the courtyard. She could be forced to witness their triumph. The mob's specific demand revealed the depth of their cruelty. They didn't just want to show Marie Antoinette her friend's fate. They wanted her to kiss the severed head. They wanted the queen who'd kissed Lamballe's cheeks in friendship to kiss them again in death. The symbolism was precise. Friendship perverted. Affection transformed into horror. Love itself made grotesque. As they marched, the crowd's chants grew more organized. Marie Antoinette, come kiss your friend. The rhythm matched their footsteps. See what we've brought you. Your Lamballe is here. Some witnesses reported an almost festive atmosphere, as if they were bringing a gift rather than staging psychological torture. But not everyone celebrated. Along the route, some Parisians shuttered their windows. Mothers pulled children inside. Even hardened revolutionaries felt queasy at this innovation in cruelty. Killing enemies was one thing. This theatrical sadism was another. A few brave souls shouted protests, only to be threatened with joining the procession as participants rather than spectators. The September afternoon sun beat down on the marchers, making the trophy's appearance even more grotesque. Flies gathered despite the crowd's movement. The smell became overwhelming. But the mob pressed on, driven by momentum and the anticipation of their cruel climax. By the time they reached the temple, the crowd numbered in the hundreds. Guards at the prison gates faced an impossible choice: disperse the mob and risk riot, or allow this horror to unfold. They chose survival, stepping aside as the crowd poured into the courtyard. The chanting reached crescendo. Antoinette, your friend is here. Come greet your Lamballe. They positioned themselves directly below the queen's window, raising the pike high, making sure the afternoon sun illuminated their trophy. They knew exactly which window was hers. They'd planned this moment of maximum cruelty with the precision of stage directors. The bitter irony? Some in that mob had eaten bread from her hands. During the harsh winter of 1788, when snow-buried Paris and the poor froze in their garrets, Princesse de Lamballe had opened her personal kitchens. She'd ordered her cooks to make soup continuously, her bakers to work through the night. Anyone who came to her door left with food, no questions asked. But here's what makes history tragic. Good deeds vanish like morning mist while symbols persist forever. The mob, marching with her head, didn't see the woman who'd spent personal fortune on charity. They saw only the princess, the queen's friend, the embodiment of aristocratic excess they'd been taught to hate. Lamballe's true character was far more complex than revolutionary propaganda allowed. Yes, she lived in luxury, but she also studied philosophy, mathematics, languages. Her library contained works revolutionaries would have approved: Voltaire, Rousseau, treatises on equality and natural rights. She corresponded with intellectuals across Europe, debating ideas that would have shocked both royalists and republicans. Her Masonic connections particularly fascinate historians. In an age when Freemasonry attracted free thinkers and reformers, Lamballe didn't just support lodges, she actively participated. She helped establish adoption lodges where women could engage in philosophical discourse. She funded publications promoting religious tolerance and scientific inquiry. The woman portrayed as an empty-headed aristocrat actually moved in circles that promoted many Enlightenment ideals. The tragedy deepens when you examine her final years. After returning from England, Lamballe threw herself into reform efforts. She worked with moderate revolutionaries who sought constitutional monarchy rather than republic. She used her influence with Marie Antoinette to promote compromise, arguing for concessions that might have prevented bloodshed. Her letters from this period reveal growing frustration. The Queen, paralyzed by fear and pride, rejected most reform proposals. The king vacillated between stubborn resistance and panic-driven concessions. Lamballe found herself caught between revolutionary friends who begged her to abandon the royals and royal friends who viewed her reform sympathies as betrayal. One particularly poignant episode occurred in early 1792. Lamballe arranged a secret meeting between Marie Antoinette and moderate revolutionary leaders. For 3 hours, she translated not just words but worldviews, trying to build bridges between incompatible positions. The meeting failed, but not for lack of effort. Both sides left respecting Lamballe, even as they despised each other. This complexity was exactly what the mob needed to erase. Revolution requires simple narratives: oppressor versus oppressed, evil versus good, them versus us. A charitable princess who read philosophy and promoted reform didn't fit the story, so they reduced her to symbol, then destroyed the symbol. The erasure had actually begun before her death. Revolutionary newspapers painted her as Marie Antoinette's evil influence, the spider whispering poison in the queen's ear. They invented scandals, implied unnatural relationships, accused her of every aristocratic vice. The woman who lived quietly, focused on friendship and charity, became a monster in public imagination. Even her appearance was weaponized against her. That ethereal beauty revolutionaries found so threatening, it came with chronic health problems. Lamballe suffered frequent fainting spells, debilitating headaches, what doctors now might diagnose as severe anxiety. The angel nickname mocked by the mob originally described her fragility as much as her kindness. Her spiritual seeking also deserves mention. Beyond Freemasonry, Lamballe explored various mystical traditions. She collected works on alchemy, astrology, ancient mysteries. She sought meaning beyond traditional Catholicism, hunger for transcendence that marked many Enlightenment figures. The mob would have been shocked to know their aristocratic victim shared their anti-clerical views. But perhaps most tragic was her gift for friendship. In an age of political marriages and calculated alliances, Lamballe offered genuine affection. She maintained correspondence with hundreds, remembering birthdays, anniversaries, personal struggles. Her letters show someone who truly cared about others' happiness. This capacity for connection, which made her indispensable to lonely Marie Antoinette, ultimately doomed her. The woman they called Angel was about to become their demon, but she was neither. She was a human being of complexity and contradiction, charitable but privileged, reform-minded but loyal to tradition, intellectual but emotional. The mob needed her to be simple, evil. History reveals someone far more interesting and tragic. As her head bobbed on its pike toward the temple prison, it represented not just aristocratic excess, but the revolution's failure to see human complexity. They'd killed a symbol. In doing so, they'd murdered a woman who might have been their ally, who shared many of their ideals, who simply couldn't betray a friend. The real horror wasn't enough. They had to invent worse. Within hours of Lamballe's death, the streets of Paris buzzed with embellished accounts that transformed brutal murder into mythological monstrosity. Each retelling added new details, new outrages, new proofs of aristocratic depravity and revolutionary justice. The most persistent lie was cannibalism. By evening September 3rd, taverns rang with tales of revolutionaries eating Lamballe's heart. Some versions had them roasting it over fires. Others described raw consumption, blood dripping from patriotic chins. The story spread faster than truth could follow, becoming accepted fact within days. But here's what's fascinating about revolutionary mythology: place. It served multiple purposes. For supporters, these extreme tales proved their movement's power. Look how thoroughly we destroy our enemies. For opponents, the same stories demonstrated revolutionary barbarism. Both sides needed the myths more than truth. Another fiction that took root involved sexual mutilation too grotesque to detail. These stories said more about the teller's obsessions than actual events. Revolutionary pornographic pamphlets had long portrayed aristocratic women as sexually depraved. Now those fantasies merged with real violence, creating narratives that let men discuss forbidden topics under the guise of political outrage. The myths served psychological functions too. Participants who felt guilty about their role could take comfort in false worse acts. "At least I didn't eat her heart," a man might tell himself after striking a single blow. The invented extremes made real brutality seem moderate by comparison. Everyone could point to someone else as the real monster. Marie Antoinette became central to these elaborations. Stories circulated that she'd been forced to kiss the severed head. Other versions had her fainting at the sight. Still others claimed she'd laughed, proving her inhuman coldness. Each version served different propaganda needs, painting the queen as either victim or monster. The timing of events got scrambled in retellings. Some accounts placed Lamballe's death in the morning, others at midnight. Some claimed she'd been killed at multiple prisons, her body transported between locations. The confusion wasn't accidental. It made fact-checking impossible and allowed everyone to claim authoritative witness. Foreign newspapers picked up the most sensational versions. London papers, eager to paint French revolutionaries as savages, printed every rumor as fact. German broadsides added illustrations that would have shocked even the actual killers. The mythology spread across Europe faster than accurate accounts, shaping international perception of the revolution. But false stories also emerged from sympathetic sources. Royalist propaganda transformed Lamballe into an impossible saint. In their telling, she'd performed miracles in prison, converted guards to monarchism, died with supernatural grace. Her last words multiplied. Every royalist writer invented new noble phrases she'd supposedly spoken. The multiplication of martyrdom narratives reveals how both sides needed heroes. Revolutionaries had their murdered journalists and assassinated leaders. Royalists needed their own sacred victims. Lamballe, beautiful and loyal unto death, fit perfectly. The facts of her brutal end weren't enough. She needed to die perfectly, poetically, meaningfully. Even physical details got mythologized. Lamballe's famous blonde hair became silver in some accounts, gold in others. Her blue eyes turned violet, grey, or green depending on the narrator's poetic needs. Her height varied by feet. Her age ranged from 25 to 50. The woman disappeared beneath layers of symbolism. The procession to Marie Antoinette's prison spawned the wildest variations. Some versions had thousands marching. Others reduced it to a handful of demons. The trophies multiplied, not just the head but various body parts described in anatomical detail that revealed more about period, medical knowledge than actual events. Weather itself became narrative tool. Some accounts set the scene in pouring rain, heaven weeping for innocents destroyed. Others described blazing sun, divine judgment on aristocratic excess. Fog appeared in romantic retellings. Snow fell in versions emphasizing suffering. September's actual mild weather satisfied no one's dramatic needs. The trial scene proved especially fertile for invention. Writers who'd never seen La Force prison described its architecture in impossible detail. Judges who'd been simple tradesmen became eloquent philosophers in some versions, drooling beasts in others. Lamballe's responses grew more elaborate with each telling, becoming philosophical treatises on loyalty and honor. Religious elements crept into every version. Catholic martyrologies had Lamballe performing impromptu conversions, blessing her killers, seeing visions of heaven. Protestant accounts emphasized biblical parallels. Revolutionary atheists mocked both, inventing their own anti-religious miracles. Everyone projected their cosmology onto her death. But Marie Antoinette didn't need to see anything. Her imagination provided the torture. Locked in her tower cell, hearing the mob's chants and demands, she could envision horrors worse than any reality. The myths and embellishments were unnecessary. Truth was terrible enough. Robespierre called it justice. History calls it the terror. But those are just words we use to compress 17,000 individual deaths into manageable concepts. Princesse de Lamballe was one number in that accounting, her spectacular end obscuring the larger mathematics of ideological murder that would consume France for 2 more years. The September massacres killed between 1,100 and 1,400 people in just 5 days. Think about that pace. That's someone dying every 5 minutes, around the clock, for nearly a week. But September was just the overture. The real symphony of death hadn't even begun. By the time Robespierre himself met the guillotine in July 1794, revolutionary justice had become an industry. But here's what gets lost in the numbers. Every victim was someone's Lamballe. Every execution destroyed a web of relationships, memories, love. A baker who sold bread to the wrong customer. A seamstress who embroidered the wrong coat of arms. A child who called out for the wrong parent. Each had their moment of facing the tribunal, making their choice, meeting their end. The escalation followed a terrible logic. First, they killed active enemies, aristocrats fleeing with gold, priests refusing oaths. But categories expanded like ink in water. Soon, enemy included anyone who'd served aristocrats, then anyone who'd sold to them, then anyone who'd spoken kindly of them. The circle widened until no one was safe. Marie-Jeanne Bécu, a flower seller, died because she'd once delivered roses to Versailles. Pierre Chambon, a wig maker, because he'd styled noble hair. Catherine Theot, a mystic, because her visions didn't align with revolutionary atheism. Names, professions, individual tragedies compressed into daily execution lists posted like theatre programs. The technology of death evolved too. September's crude pike and saber work gave way to the guillotine's mechanical efficiency. Dr. Guillotin had invented his device as humanitarian reform, swift, painless, egalitarian death replacing torture. The revolution perverted his mercy into mass production. Some days, the Place de la Révolution processed 50 victims. The blade fell so often, it needed constant sharpening. But efficiency created new problems. Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. Blood pooled ankle-deep around the scaffold. The stench became unbearable. Citizens complained not about the killing but about the inconvenience. Property values near execution sites plummeted. The revolution had to develop entire bureaucracies just to manage its corpses. The psychology of normalized murder fascinates historians. Execution crowds evolved their own customs. Regular attendees had favorite viewing spots. Vendors sold programs listing the days condemned. Women brought knitting, clicking needles in rhythm with the falling blade. Children played with toy guillotines. Death became entertainment, routine, background noise to daily life. Yet individual humanity kept breaking through. Guards reported condemned prisoners comforting each other in tumbrils rolling to the scaffold. Strangers held hands facing death. A young mother gave her baby to crowd members, begging them to find kind parents. An old man spent his last minutes teaching a terrified boy how to die with dignity. These moments of grace amid horror remind us these were people, not statistics. The terror's twisted logic eventually consumed its own creators. Danton, who'd helped orchestrate the September massacres, died declaring the revolution was devouring its children. Hébert, who'd judged Lamballe, followed her to execution barely a year later. The machine of death recognized no loyalty, no past service, no revolutionary credentials. It only knew hunger. What started as targeted political violence became existential paranoia. The law of suspects made everyone potentially guilty. Friendship became evidence of conspiracy. Silence implied dissent. Even enthusiasm could be suspicious. Were you overcompensating? The safest strategy was to denounce others before they denounced you. France became a nation of informants. Provincial France suffered too. Though Paris monopolized attention, Lyon saw hundreds shot with grape shot. Nantes pioneered mass drowning. The Vendée became a charnel house where revolutionary armies slaughtered entire villages. Each region developed its own methods, its own justifications, its own mounting body counts. The numbers numb us. 17,000 official executions, perhaps 40,000 total deaths, including prison murders and provincial massacres. Another 300,000 arrested, living in daily terror of hearing their names called. Behind each number, a Lamballe, someone who'd loved, been loved, made choices, faced consequences. And now we return to that window, where Marie Antoinette waits. She's about to receive her own preview of coming attractions. In 13 months, she'll follow her friend's path. Trial, condemnation, execution. But first, she must endure this moment of weaponized grief, this demonstration that revolutionary justice reaches even into the human heart. The mob's chanting grew louder, more insistent. "Kiss her! Kiss your friend!" Marie Antoinette gripped the window bars until her knuckles went white. Below in the courtyard, the pike swayed like some hellish metronome. The afternoon sun caught the blonde hair, that beautiful hair she'd helped style so many times, now grotesquely displayed. A guard, either from pity or cruelty, confirmed what she already knew. "It's the Princesse De Lamballe, Majesty. The people have brought her to visit." The formal announcement, the mockery of court protocol, made it worse, as if this were some twisted social call, as if her dearest friend had simply arrived for afternoon tea. Marie Antoinette's legs gave way. She collapsed below the window, pressing herself against the stone wall, but she could still hear them. The songs about her and Lamballe, the vile suggestions. The laughter, always the laughter. How had human joy transformed into this weapon? The mob waited, growing impatient. Someone threw a stone that cracked against the bars. Another shouted detailed descriptions of what they'd done, what they carried, what the Queen was missing by not looking. They'd crafted this moment of cruelty, and demanded she participate. Her grief was to be their entertainment. Inside her cell, time fractured. Past and present collapsed together. She saw Lamballe at 20 dancing at her wedding, Lamballe at 30 holding her hand through another miscarriage, Lamballe at 40 choosing death over betrayal. All those moments of friendship now led to this gothic horror, this demonstration that love itself could be weaponized. The guards later reported that Marie Antoinette wept all night. Not gentle tears, but body-shaking sobs that echoed through the temple tower. She who'd maintained royal composure through every humiliation finally broke. The revolution had found her weakness, not in her pride or privilege, but in her capacity to love. By morning, the mob had dispersed, taking their trophy to display elsewhere. But the damage was complete. Marie Antoinette never recovered from that September afternoon. Witnesses at her own trial 13 months later described a woman aged decades in months, white-haired and hollow-eyed. The widow who'd lost her husband found unbearable the widow who'd lost her friend. The parallel fates strike us even now. Two women bound by friendship, destroyed by the same forces, dying for the same refusal to betray their bonds. Lamballe could have saved herself with 7 words denouncing the Queen. Marie Antoinette could have saved herself by fleeing earlier, abandoning the friend who'd returned for her. Neither could bring themselves to break faith. In the end, both women faced their executions with the same dignity. Marie Antoinette, on October 16, 1793, rode the tumbril to the scaffold in a simple white dress. No trembling, no tears, no pleas. She'd learned from Lamballe that how you die matters, that grace under horror denies your killers complete victory. The revolution eventually exhausted itself, choking on its own blood. Robespierre discovered that the logic of terror has no stopping point. The crowds who'd cheered executions eventually sickened of death. The Napoleon who restored order had witnessed the September massacres as a young officer, learning exactly what not to do. But individual tragedies echo longest. In royal archives, they found Lamballe's last letter to Marie Antoinette, written the night before her arrest. "Whatever comes, know that I regret nothing. To be your friend has been my life's great privilege. If I must die for it, I die complete." Friendship. In the end, that's what threatened the revolution most. Not aristocratic wealth or royal power, but the simple human refusal to betray love for ideology. The mob understood this. That's why they didn't just kill Lamballe. They transformed her into a weapon aimed at the human heart. Today, tourists pass the sites of these horrors without recognition. The Temple Tower is gone. La Force prison is apartments. The Place de la Révolution is the Place de la Concorde. Paris buried its bloody memories under pleasant stones. But on certain September afternoons, when the sun slants just right, you can almost hear the echoes, the chants, the cheers, and somewhere, a woman weeping for her friend. That's the real lesson of Princesse de Lamballe's execution. Not just that revolutions devour their children, though they do. Not just that ideology justifies any cruelty, though it does. But that human bonds endure even when transformed into weapons. That love persists even when used for torture. That in the mathematics of terror, the greatest threat is anyone who insists on remaining human.